appreciate that introduction. Those of you who know me know my father-in-law was an Irish immigrant to this country, and he would introduce me slightly differently. What he'd say to you is, "I'd like you to meet my son-in-law Dave. He's a doctor, but it's not the kind does you any good." It helps when Jeff makes presentations like that. It's such an honor to be here because your dean, James Herbert Williams, and Jeff Jensen are my students. I was their PhD advisor, and I am so proud of these two gentlemen and all they have accomplished across this country and across the world and in this school. It's just so delightful for me to be able to be here and see what this school is under the leadership of James Herbert Williams as dean and Jeff as an associate dean for research. So I'm very honored to be here. It's a great pleasure, and thank you for inviting me. So I guess I better start at home. My commitment to prevention begins at home. My wife Maureen and I have been married for 43 years. We've been working on our marriage all that time. We're still working on it. We have 2 kids, Quinn, who's now 32, and Nora, who's now 27. And we wanted those kids to be productive members of their communities, to live lives free of violence and substance abuse, to have strong families and friendships. It's what I think all parents want for their kids. And it's really an honor and a privilege to be able to talk to you about what we've been learning from our work about how we as adults can promote the healthy development of young people. I wasn't always a professor at the university. Before that, I was a probation officer working with delinquent kids. I will spare you my war stories, but when I do say before that, I'm reminded of a trip Maureen and I took to Ireland to visit her relatives one time. We had never met them before. They didn't have a telephone at that time. They knew we were coming at some point in time. We knocked on the door at the Mahan house, and Mrs. Mahan opens the door and she says, "We're so glad you've come home," and welcomed us in. And we were sitting there talking, and pretty soon the food was out, and pretty soon the musical instruments are out, and we were playing music, having a wonderful time. And Maureen says, "Now, isn't there an Uncle Jack Mahan?" And Mrs. Mahan says, "Ah, yes, your Uncle Jack. He's gone to town in the donkey cart. He'll be home soon enough. You go up on the road and you'll see him sure enough." So we did. We went up on the road, and there's this elderly man coming along in a little cart, and Maureen starts up to him, and he says, "You're Kathleen's daughter." And she says, "Yes." And he says, "And who are you?" And I said, I'm David Hawkins. I'm Maureen's husband." He says, "And where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from America." And he says, "Before that." And I explained to him how my parents were from Missouri and grew up in Missouri. He says, "Before that." And so we began working our way slowly through the Hawkins lineage back further and further east until finally I had to say to him, "Well, Uncle Jack, as far as I know, Hawkins is an English name for County Cornwall in the south of England." Uncle Jack Mahan never spoke to me again. It's a true story. God rest his soul. He's passed from this earth now, but he turned from me and he never said another word to me. And it just reminds me how easy it is to fail to communicate across cultural and other kinds of boundaries that sometimes separate us, even when you're members of the same family. I'm here because I'm committed to the healthy, successful development of all children, regardless of where they came from before that. So I come from Seattle. It's a nice place, and we do have a mountain too. Not as many and not as tall, but we do. That's Mount Rainier over my town. So let's start with a little quiz. There were 9 true experimental tests of delinquency prevention approaches in the United States conducted before many of you were alive, but before 1980, which is when I started working at the University of Washington a few years before that. So the quiz is, how many of those 9 experiments, efforts to prevent delinquency before it happens, how many do you think were shown to be effective in the randomized controlled trials that were done on those? How many? 9? Raise your hand when I get to your number. 7? 5? If you've seen this before. 3? 1. How about 1? None. None. No effective, proven methods of preventing delinquency before it happens 30-some years ago. That's where we were when I started in this field. Now, in the prevention area of substance abuse, it was even worse because people who did trials sometimes did trials of what are called drug information approaches, which is you take a drug board into schools and show kids the drugs. Maybe you take a baggie of marijuana into schools and pass it around and hope it gets back to the front. And you're talking to kids about, you know, these are things that can risk your health and that are bad for you. And yet, when people did randomized trials of those experiments, it turned out that kids who were exposed to the prevention program were more likely to use in the year following that exposure than the kids who you just left alone. The doctors who do you good have an adage. They say, above all, do no harm. And when we're talking about prevention, trying to intervene in people's lives before there is a problem, we really need to make sure that what we do is effective and successful, not ineffective or, even worse, harmful. We've had a sea change in the last 33 years. And in 2009, a report from the Institute of Medicine at the National Academies of Science reported on the progress that we've made in the prevention of adolescent health and behavior problems. And and if you haven't seen this book, you really need to look at this book. It is kind of the definitive work on prevention of adolescent behavioral health problems as of 2009. What that book says is that it is very important, if you want to prevent a problem before it happens, to address the predictors of that problem. If we were today talking about heart disease, cardiovascular disease, and I were to ask you, what are the predictors of heart disease, cardiovascular disease, what would you say? We all know them. Just shout them out. Smoking's one, obesity's another. Family history's one. For cardiovascular disease. What other ones? Any others? Sedentary lifestyle. Okay, so some of these are family history, that's genetic potentially, but some of these are lifestyle choices that people make. Smoking, sedentary lifestyle, diet high in fat, etc. And we've had a sea change in America over the last 40 years as a result of understanding the risk factors for heart and lung disease and trying to change the way we live our lives in order to reduce risk. Nobody in this building is smoking today. You're not allowed to do it. I would submit to you that 30 years ago there would have been ashtrays on the chairs. Today in America, if you don't exercise, at least you feel guilty. We know we're supposed to do that. So what's really exciting in our area, this prevention of adolescent health and behavior problems, trying to intervene before there is a problem to see if you can prevent that problem. Two big breakthroughs. One, longitudinal studies have identified factors that when present earlier in development appear to increase risk of problem behaviors, as well as factors that when present appear to buffer against the effective risk exposure. Also, there have been now many trials of preventive interventions that have been shown to be effective. So the prediction in our area, the identification of those factors when present earlier in development that increase the likelihood of problem behaviors are called risk factors, and those factors that when present buffer against the development of problem behaviors are called protective factors, or some people call them promotive factors because they promote health. What's really important is that over the last 30 years or so, there have been a number of longitudinal studies identifying factors that predict negative outcomes. If you look across the columns here, you see substance abuse, delinquency, etc. Those are outcomes. And if you look down the rows, what you're seeing is factors that have been shown in 2 or more high-quality longitudinal or epidemiological studies to predict the outcome where you see a check at the intersection of a row and a column. If you don't see a check, it doesn't mean it's definitively not a risk factor, but it means currently we don't know that that risk factor increases that problem. And what you'll notice is that there are risk factors within the community and neighborhood domain. There are risk factors within family experiences, risk factors within school experiences, as well as risk factors within individuals and their peer groups. And not only that, some of these risk factors affect multiple problems. If you look at the second risk factor under family risk factors, it's called family management problems. What that means, there's kind of 3 components of that. One is parents don't set clear expectations for their children's behavior. They don't monitor their children in developmentally appropriate ways. And they're excessively severe and inconsistent in their punishment. Parents who don't set clear expectations, who don't consistently monitor their kids, and who are excessively severe and inconsistent in punishment, in fact, increase risk for every one of these health and behavior problems, including depression. So these shared risk factors are things that if we were successful in addressing, we might prevent not only substance use, not only delinquency, but perhaps a broad range of negative outcomes. If I'm doing okay with this, I'm going to ask you from time to time to give me a signal, yeah, you're with me. If I'm not, just look blank and stare, and then I'll know that it's not working. So are you with me okay? Is this okay with this? If people have questions about risk factors, we'll come back to those. If you see things up there, say, I don't know what that is, we'll come back to those in a little while. But I want to just get the concept here of risk-focused prevention. Those same studies, the good news from those longitudinal studies is that those studies have also identified factors that, when present, appear to inhibit the development of problem behaviors. So kids who are born with high intelligence, that helps them negotiate difficult environments. Kids who have a resilient temperament, my kids, Quinn and Nora, Quinn has a resilient temperament. I might shout at Quinn when he was a teenager, and 2 minutes later he'd say, hey Dad, let's go out and shoot baskets. If I were to talk to Nora as loudly as I'm talking to you right now when she was a little girl, she would have gone in her room and hid and said, Dad's mad at me, and she wouldn't talk to me for a long, long time. She didn't have a resilient temperament. They're peas from the same pod as far as I know, but they have different temperaments, and that temperament affects their ability to negotiate difficult environmental contexts that they run into it. And also, we know that there are also differences in people's social and interpersonal competencies, ability to use humor in situations, ability to solve problems, ability to delay gratification, etc. And we know those competencies and skills can be taught. They are individual characteristics that, when learned or when developed over time, are protective. In addition, there are environmental factors that also are protective even in the face of risk. One is opportunities for pro-social involvement. Children who don't ever get called on in class never get an opportunity for pro-social involvement. Reinforcement for pro-social involvement is also an important protective promotive factor. That is, when young people are recognized for their effort, for their improvement, and for their achievement, that turns out to give them motivation to continue more pro-social kind of activities. In fact, when children are reinforced for their efforts by a particular group, they become more emotionally connected to that group, or attached or bonded to that group. And bonding is really important as a protective factor. When people feel bonded to other people, that is, they feel emotionally close to them and they feel committed to them. If you're bonded to your family, you feel that way about the adults in your family, if you're a young person, then it's important, because when those adults promote clear standards for behavior, kids who are bonded are more motivated to pay attention to those standards. Many years ago, Mrs. Reagan said, just say no. Well, that's healthy standards for behavior. But she didn't work on bonding. She didn't work on ensuring that the kids would care what our standards are. And so these are all important promotive and protective factors that research has shown, when present, inhibit the development of problem behaviors. A number of people have said, if we know this, we should be doing preventive interventions that address those risk factors that are malleable and strengthen those protective factors that are malleable. And in fact, a number of people have done just that, done longitudinal studies to see, could we reduce risk, enhance protection, and produce positive outcomes. And in fact, there are a number of studies that have now shown positive effects on multiple outcomes. Not every study of each of these types has been shown to be effective, but there is at least one and sometimes multiple preventive interventions that have been tested in well-controlled or quasi-experimental trials that have shown positive effects on reducing adolescent behavioral health problems as a result of preventive interventions. The ones that are in yellow are ones that are changes in schools or new curricula in schools, things that happen within schools that have been shown to be preventive. How am I doing? With me still? Okay on this? Keep rolling. Also, those studies have identified strategies that don't work. Information only about drugs, information only about delinquency, etc. It's not effective. Testimonials from recovered addicts. I don't know how many people have heard these before, but you know, there's a one-day assembly and somebody comes and tells their story and everybody is motivated for a little while until young people figure out, well, maybe I could be an addict for a while and then I could be a recovering addict and go make assembly speeches. Scare tactics. Scared Straight, do you remember Scared Straight? Scared Straight is still on TV. And yet there have been multiple trials of approaches which take kids to prisons and let inmates yell and scream at them. And they've been shown to not only be ineffective, but kids exposed to those programs are actually more likely to be delinquent in the year following that exposure. So there are things that don't work, and we're doing a lot of them still in America, in our schools and communities. So I want to give you an example of a school-based program that has been tested and has been shown to be effective. It's a project that we did in Seattle called the Seattle Social Development Project. It was a test of a preventive intervention called Raising Healthy Children. The test that we did in Seattle involved kids in grades 1 through 6. So we were following a panel of young people forward from first grade through their first grades of elementary school. This intervention is based on a theory that we call the social development model. It's a theory that puts together sociological and psychological theories into an overarching theory of both antisocial behavior and prosocial behavior. And this is the first time I want to ask you to remember something. So if you take nothing else away from this presentation, I hope that you might take this part away. The goal of this strategy is healthy behaviors. We want kids to be pro-social, healthy, doing well. So what do we need to do? We think, and our research shows that it's as simple as the fingers on one hand. If you have 5 fingers on either of your hands, you can do this. Okay? The first is opportunities for active involvement that are developmentally appropriate. That's what we need to provide to young people. That means when a mom picks up an infant, that's an opportunity for active involvement. She's in the mom's arms instead of laying in the layette or in the playpen or whatever. So picking up an infant is an opportunity for active involvement. In the first grade, if I get to feed the gerbils, that's an opportunity for active involvement. When I'm in the 4th grade, if the teacher sometimes asks me what 6 times 9 is, that's an opportunity for active involvement. If I'm a young person in the middle school years and they're building a new park in our neighborhood and they ask young people to be involved in helping to plan that park, that's an opportunity for active involvement. The second thing people need is the skills to be successful in the opportunities they have. So mom picks up the baby, and the baby goes, "Abba, abba." That's a skillful performance for an infant. If the baby stiffens, because the baby was affected by cocaine in utero, that's not a skillful performance. And sometimes if a baby stiffens when mom picks it up, the mom says, "Oh, she doesn't like me, doesn't like me. Something's wrong." But if the baby goes, that's a skillful performance on the part of that child. In the first grade, if I learned not only to feed but also to water the gerbils, then that's a skillful performance. And now we go through a week and I'm watering and feeding the gerbils, and now it is the end of my week of feeding and watering the gerbils, and the teacher says, "Class, Dave fed and watered the gerbils, and look at them, they're running around the cage and they're doing a great job and it's really great, and aren't we proud of Dave for doing the gerbils and taking care of the gerbils? Let's clap for him." That's recognition. That's recognition for skillful performance. And what do you think that makes me feel when I get that recognition? It makes me feel, I like this place. I like this class. I like being here. I'm okay. I'm a gerbil feeder. And the teacher says I should do homework, and I'm going to be a homeworker too. So opportunity, skills, and recognition, they're the first 3 elements of pro-social development in the social development strategy, and they lead to a sense of bonding, a sense of attachment and commitment. And that bonding is so important because if kids feel bonded, they care about the standards offered by that group. So bonding's the 4th element, and the 5th element is clear standards for behavior. As adults, as teachers, as parents, we need to communicate as neighbors, we need to communicate clear standards for behavior. We don't do that in our neighborhood. This family, we don't smoke marijuana. Whatever it is, the standards matter, particularly to young people, if they feel bonded to the people who are making those standards. I want you to think about street gangs and drug dealers. They get my model better than we do. So what happens If you're a young person in a neighborhood and you're walking around and the guy says to you, hey man, you want to make 20 bucks? Sure, what do I have to do? Just keep your eyes out and look around, and if you see anybody you don't recognize coming in the neighborhoods or cops or anybody, just tip your hat. What is that? Opportunity for active involvement. So what do I have to do? I have to just keep my eyes out and recognize people I know and don't know and tip my hat. What is that? That's a skillful performance. And what do I get after that? 20 bucks. And now what? Now I'm starting to say, hey, this guy's all right. He just gave me 20 bucks for doing something pretty easy. I kind of like this. And so I start to become bonded to somebody who doesn't hold healthy beliefs and clear standards. It's not a war on drugs that we're involved in. It is a battle to build the commitment and attachment and bonding of young people to pro-social others and activities. Thank you. Now look, the last part of this is their individual differences. We know there are differences. Different people get rewarded differently. Even different cultural groups get rewarded differently. In my family, I can say to Quinn, wow, Quinn, that's great. You really did great on your grades. You got 4.0. That's wonderful. If I did that to Nora, she would say, Dad, leave me alone. But I could say to Maureen, did you see Nora's report card? She got all A's on her report card. Isn't that fantastic? And Nora would bask in the sunshine, just not pointed towards her. So we have to take account of the differences. In the Native American community, you may not say, you made a great accomplishment. You may say, you've contributed to our community, to our tribe. So the way we give opportunities and recognition needs to be sensitive to individual characteristics. How am I doing? We with me so far? Working okay? Okay. I want to just see if you can see opportunities, skills, reward, and bonding and commitment all come out of this just 30-second interaction. This is how it happens, I think. Maybe. Oh, I was doing so well before. Okay, so she had an opportunity for involvement. She really wasn't that skillful. She counted them all up individually, right? But the mom says, that's right, you got them all right. That's recognition and reinforcement. And then she says, do you like doing math? Yes. Are you good at, oh yes, that's a commitment of a girl to doing math and learning math because she had that opportunity. It's just a brief example of social development and a parent-child interaction. So we said this is a good idea. We like this theory. It comes from other theories. Let's see if we could put it in place in the lives of young people entering the Seattle Public Schools as first graders. We began a study in 1981 when, in 8 elementary schools in Seattle, and when the kids in that study were in the 5th grade, the study got expanded to 18 elementary schools, and it became not a true randomized experiment anymore, but what's called a quasi-experiment, in which there was a comparison group, but it wasn't randomly assigned. And so what we ended up with was a group of 150, 149 kids who had been through the intervention in grades 1 through 6, a group that got the intervention only in grades 5 and 6, and a control group that we'll be comparing. This is Seattle, so it's half male, half female basically. You see about 47% kids of European American descent, 28% African American, and so on. You can see the proportions of different ethnic groups there. And about 52% of the kids in the study were eligible for free lunch coming from low income or families in poverty. So what we did, the intervention, 3 components. One was training teachers in better methods of teaching and managing their classroom. Not a curriculum, just how do you teach and manage to keep that theory in mind of opportunity, skills, recognition, bonding. Offering parents voluntary workshops of the same, to meet those same principles, and also ensuring that children develop basic cognitive and emotional skills that they needed to be effective and successful in the classroom and in their family. So I won't take a lot of time on these things, but there are three components to the teacher in-service training. One is proactive classroom management. How do you establish the rules and expectations of the classroom in such a way that everybody knows what's expected when they come into the classroom and gets down to work doing projects and things that they need to do, so that while the teacher's taking roll or whatever, the kids aren't nudging each other and waiting for things to happen. It is filling up the time always with active things to do. And it's also using what we call the law of least intervention. If two people in the back are talking and the teacher says, please, please be quiet, what does that do? Well, it calls attention to those people. All the other kids in the classroom look at them and laugh. They got in trouble. Okay? But if the teacher doesn't call attention to those people but continues the lecture and doesn't say anything to them at all, but just says, you know, we're going on with our lecture, and stands next to the people who were talking, they're going to be quiet, and there was no need to call any attention to them at all. And I haven't lost time from instruction, and I haven't called attention to people who are out of doing what I don't want them to do. So it's just one example of better methods of instructing and managing the classroom. Interactive teaching is the second instructional method that we work with the teachers on. It's the difference after you do a mental set and after you do the objectives and after you do the input, how do you check for understanding? How many times have you been in a classroom where the teacher says, who can tell me what 9 times 6 is? There'll be 3 kids in the front with their hands raised. They will have the answer. The teacher will call on one of them because they have their hands raised, and they'll get it right, and the teacher will say, good, they understand, and go on. And all the people who sit in public school classrooms, if you let them sit where they want, around the U, around the outside, will say, got past that one. It's the difference between checking for understanding that way, and if you're a teacher, checking for understanding so that you're polling the whole class. So if it's 9 times 6, people can have a little notepad and say, okay, everybody, what's 9 times 6? Write it on your notepad. When I count 3, show me. Now I get to see how many people have the right answer. So there are many different methods that we use for doing this, but the idea is when you check for understanding, check with the whole group, not just with those avid, enthusiastic students in the front and in the middle. Because the other thing is, what happens if 50 or 60% of the kids have it, but not everybody has it? Well, what we do in this instructional method is put them into cooperative learning groups that are heterogeneous, that is, with more able and less able students, 4 people on a team, and we make sure that those teams are what are called reward interdependent. That is, the team members all depend on each other in order to succeed. And success could be that we get to line up for lunch early, or that we get ice cream social, or that we get, you know, there are various things that we can provide as recognition for people who are successful. Or you can just get your team's name on the board with their picture. Turns out to be really exciting for young people to have somebody take their picture and put it on the wall of our classroom because they did well today. So the idea is that instead of the teacher having to reteach that material, now kids are learning that material from each other, and because there's this reward interdependence, they want each other to learn. And it changes the peer dynamics of classrooms. If you take pictures of kids into a classroom and you say to a young person, okay, who's that kid? Oh, well, that's Bill, he's really smart. Do you like Bill? No, not really. Who's that? Well, you know, and you go on. If you've had a cooperative learning classroom that really has this reward interdependence built in, you say, who's that? Oh, that's Bill. He's really smart and he's a nice guy. He helps me with my homework. He helps me with learning. So that you can change the peer dynamics where people are, instead of being all in competition with each other, people are helping each other learn, and people who otherwise wouldn't have been friends start to become friends. It was actually developed initially to help in desegregated classrooms increase cross-racial friendship attachments. It's very effective in doing that, but it's also very effective in increasing learning. Am I doing okay with this? Is this too much? How much is this? If this is too much detail, will you raise your hand? This is boring, too much detail. Thank you. You're in the minority, but you may be in the majority soon, so keep being honest. So what about the parents? When the kids were in 1st and 2nd grade, we really helped the parents, offered workshops to the parents that helped them think about, how do I recognize positive behavior? How do I play with my kids? How do I be specific in my feedback on behavior. Instead of saying, you always, those kinds of things, being very specific in feedback, being able to pinpoint the behavior and get very clear about expectations for behavior, and then consistently and moderately consequate behavior, both recognize and reinforce positive behavior. How many people are familiar with a program called The Incredible Years by Carolyn Webster Stratton? So Incredible Years, what does it start with? Play with your kids, right? It starts with playing with your kids, doing positive things with your kids. And that's part of that bonding experience, opportunity for active involvement, etc. So we were trying to help parents with that in the early grades. As we did this project and talked to parents, we found a number of parents who were coming from low-income backgrounds who didn't have experience of success at school and who really thought that school was the key to their child's success, but they were afraid of school. They were afraid to talk to the teachers. They were afraid to go there. They'd had bad experiences there and they didn't really want to do it, but they didn't, and they wanted their kid to do well. And so what they would find is they would hear from their child's teacher sometime during the course of the first year, well, James is having trouble in school, or he's being disruptive in the classroom and there's problems. And mom's thinking, you think James is a problem? You should see my 12-year-old. But in reality, what we did was we said, let's change the way schools reach out to kids. Let's start by doing a home visit to all the kids who are entering the first grade classroom. And that home visit would be done by a family life educator, not requiring the teacher to do this, but somebody who would be leading those parenting classes to do that. And that person knocked on the door and said, hi, I understand James is going to be in the class. Mrs. Williams is a teacher. Here's some things about her. Tell me some things about James that I could take to Mrs. Williams, that she could know James before he even gets there and have some things to be able to say to him and talk to him about. That home visit was really important because later on, when we asked people to come out to workshops, the person who was inviting them to come to the workshops was in fact someone who'd been to their home and had visited them and reached out to them. And so it helped increase the likelihood that parents would participate in these workshops. And the third one is a program called Guiding Good Choices. It's for parents of kids just entering adolescence, as they're in the kids are in the 5th, 6th, 7th grade. It's 5 sessions in which the parents start by planning a family fun activity that they do together as a family, increase opportunity for involvement, etc. They do that activity together, etc. But over time, they also learn how to set clear expectations in the family. They learn how to teach their kids refusal skills, and they play those play refusal skills games on the way to school or when they're at home over dinner. Quinn and I used to do then when we were going to school. I'd be taking him to school, and I'd say, Quinn, it's a pretty day. Let's go skiing. Well, Dad, and so he's supposed to try to practice his skills, and does he practice his skills? Or, and there are these sets of 5 skills that we taught them to do, and I need to know all the details of it. But so that's the parenting part. So what you can see is we're trying to change the daily environment of these kids in the classroom and in their homes, and also offered them a curriculum in the 1st grade that offered some basic skills. And again in the 5th grade, in the 6th grade, refusal skills. So that's the whole intervention. We follow these kids. Through age 33. We've actually collected data from them at age 35. And look at the response rate. We're getting over 90% completion rates from age 14 on. So there's no attrition here. This isn't talking about, oh, well, these are just the good kids left. This is a big chunk of the kids who were in this project. And when you get to the end of 6th grade, the green in this are the kids in the control group. The turquoise are the kids who got it only for 2 years, and the dark blue are the kids who were in the project for the elementary years, the elementary grades. And what you see is significant positive effects on both math and language as scored by the California Achievement Test scores of the full intervention versus the control. The late intervention's doing better than control group, but not significantly so with regard to language, although it is with regard to math. So that suggested to us that we need to start this early and do this during the elementary grades, not wait until 5th or 6th grade. This was a big question among researchers at that time. Why do you have to start in 1st grade? Why don't you just start in the 5th and 6th grade? That's when kids are starting to get interested in drugs. And what we are finding is that it really does make a difference if you start early in this intervention. This is what happens to school bonding at least in Seattle public schools, between the ages of 13 and 18. It just goes down. Kids like school less and less and less and less each year. This is what happens in the late intervention group. Now remember, we were working with them through through age 12. So at age 13, they were a little bit better than the kids in the control group, but that was not significantly better than the kids in the control group. They were not more committed or bonded to school through that whole period. This is the full treatment group. They were really liking school when they came into middle school, and the first 2 years of middle school kind of threw them for a loop. But in fact, they then stabilized, and by the time they were 16 and 18, they were significantly more committed to education and schooling than the kids in the control group. And what that means is that you start to see effects at age 18, 6 years after we did anything different, between the full intervention group and the control group. Heavy alcohol use, 25% in the control group at age 18 compared to 15% in the full group. And you can read those things, but you can see kids held back in school, 22% versus 14%. High school graduation by the age of 21, 91% in the full intervention group in an urban school district versus 81% in the control group. 14% going to university, etc. So we saw effects of this intervention that endured well beyond the years of the intervention. And in fact, we also have found that there are significant effects on mental health outcomes. These are kids who, on the diagnostic interview schedule, would meet criteria for having one of these mental health problems. And what you can see is in the control group, 27% at age 24 and 26% at age 27 were having a diagnosable mental health problem in the past year, compared to about 18% and 15% in the full intervention group. And again, you see this stair step where there is an effect of doing this starting in the 5th and 6th grade, but it's not significantly better than the control group when we follow them up at age 24 or 27, whereas the full intervention group is significantly better than the control group at these ages. We never mentioned the S word. We never said sex, ever. There was no curriculum, nothing about sex. But when we follow up the young women in this panel, we find that age 21, by age 21, 56% of the girls in the control group had been pregnant, 38% of kids in the women in the full intervention group. Fully 40% of the girls in the control group had had a baby by the time they were 21, compared to 23% of the girls in the full intervention group. That's almost cutting in half the rate of teen pregnancy. No sex curriculum, just because they were on a developmental trajectory that said, I can be a success in life and I'm not going to risk it. And how do I say that? And why do I say that? Because there was no difference in the self-reports of boys getting somebody pregnant. What are the consequences to young men of getting someone pregnant in our society? Virtually none. And as a result, they didn't see it as risky in that way to get somebody pregnant. And so similar proportions of them said, I'd gotten somebody pregnant. But among the young women, they said, no, I'm not getting pregnant. And many fewer of them actually did and actually had their babies. This also means that we find effects on sexually transmitted infection. And in fact, these effects are particularly dramatic. I didn't bring this slide or show this slide, but particularly dramatic for African Americans. 65% of the African Americans in the control group report having had a sexually transmitted infection by the time they're 30, 65%, versus 27% in the full intervention group. Big, big effect. The Washington State Institute for Public Policy has done a cost-benefit analysis of this to say, if you look at all the costs of training those teachers and offering those parent workshops and doing all those things, and then follow up these kids and see these outcomes, how much does it save society to have less mental health problems, to have less involvement in criminal behavior, drug dealing, etc. And what they have calculated is that every dollar investment in this intervention produces a $2.11 return in terms of reductions in crime and substance use and increases in high school graduation that turn into better earnings over their lifetime. So These data suggest that increasing opportunity, skills, and recognition for young people in the elementary grades puts them on a developmental trajectory that's positive, that parents and teachers can use this social development strategy to make a demonstrable difference that lasts into adulthood. And I haven't shown you the specifics of this except to talk about young females and pregnancy and young African Americans and the STDs or STIs, but we see greater effects in the higher risk groups than in the general population. So I'm going to stop talking at you for a while, and I want you to think with your neighbor for a minute and answer these 3 questions. Have you heard anything that interested you? Have you heard anything useful? And what are your next questions? So talk. Find someone to talk with if you're just sitting by yourself, if you would. So any questions or comments that people want to share with the larger group that where you are right now? Questions that people have, wait, this didn't make sense to me? Comments? Anything that people said, I like this? Yes?
This is great. I've been actually running this type of program for 20 years. But the question I have for you is there's a lot of different curriculums out there. Have you looked into any difference between these curriculums that are following some models?
Yeah, and in fact, we're going to go to the next section to kind of talk a little bit about what we know about some of those things, but it's in general terms. Are you talking about curricula for teaching teachers to do better classroom management and instruction?
In parent education as well.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot out there.
Yes. Let me just, that's a great question. We'll come right back to that. Any other comments or, yes?
I was wondering, like when you had the groups for comparisons on race and gender, did you do any on like English language learners?
There was a lot less concern with that at that period of time in Seattle. We didn't have a lot of Latino families in Seattle at that time. So there wasn't a lot in terms of that population, but we did in the parenting workshops have Southeast Asian immigrants, Cambodian and other immigrants, where we would have to actually change some of the design of the intervention itself so that we wouldn't just ask mom and dad to come out, we'd ask extended family to come to those things where respected elders were involved, et cetera. And some of these materials, the parenting materials, have been translated into Spanish and other languages. But that was less of an issue today, or then, than it would be today in this particular place. But Guiding Good Choices, which is a curriculum that's available, is available in both with English and Spanish versions. Yes?
So besides gender differences, did you find other subgroup differences in terms of the efficacy?
Yeah, like the STIs is an example. Much higher rate of STIs in the control group among African Americans. But in the full intervention group, the rates are almost equivalent. 1 percentage point difference in terms of the percentage of whites who had an STI versus African Americans who had an STI. So it really had a greater effect on the higher risk population in that instance. There are other specific ones, but nothing that's hugely noticeable, except that continuously you find that there are overall effects, and where you do look at a higher risk population, often the effects are greater for the higher risk group. Yes, way in the back.
You looked at the fact that the children sustain their behavior changes. Did you look at the adults?
It's a great question, and we did not.
The parents?
We didn't. We didn't look at that question. We don't know the extent to which parents who learn those things in the workshops continue to practice those skills, et cetera. The only thing that we know is that that parenting program, the Guiding Good Choices one, the third one we did, it's been independently tested by a different research group and has shown to have positive effects in reducing adolescent substance use, which would suggest that the parents are learning the skills and practicing them in their lives because it's an independent test, that curriculum, which has lasting effects on kids' behavior for 4, 5, 6 years. Yes, sir. Exactly.
Which can introduce some bias in terms of the results. I don't know what was the participation rate like?
Yeah.
If it was really high, what did you do?
Good. Yeah. The overall participation rate of people who came to at least one workshop over the period of those 6 years was 40%. That's a very high rate for most interventions. And if you look at the interventions, the problem is really recruitment more than retention. Once you get people out, retaining them is not so hard if you can get them to come the first thing. We could do a long thing on recruitment, but just some of the things that we did on recruitment were things like we would have for Guiding Good Choices when the kids were in 5th grade, the kids in art class or in the art period would do an anti-drug poster. And they were told that there would be a judging of the posters on Thursday night, and that in order for their post, and that the winning poster would get a $20 certificate to Toys R Us, and the runner-up would get a $10 certificate to Toys R Us, and that in order for their poster to be judged, at least one of their parents had to be there at the evening when the principal was going to judge the things. So the kids would say, "Mom, we got to go to this thing. I want to do that." And so the kids and my parents would say, "I don't know why I'm here, but my son says I have to be here." And then they stayed for a few minutes, and they then would stay and participate. So there were just a whole lot of ways to do that. We had raffles at the parenting classes, so that every time you came, you put your ticket in to the raffle, and then bicycle was the prize for winners. We did a lot of peer recruitment. Parents who'd been to the classes, the first rung of people who came to the classes, would then make a commitment to recruit for the next year or the next set of sessions their best friends or the parents of their kids' best friends. And once you start to have that start to happen, you start getting these parenting networks going, and the parenting networks start to really support one another in parenting, and the parents start calling each other and say, "You're letting them hang at the 7-Eleven?" or "What time is curfew for you?" In our own family, this parent network started around in my son's school, and we, in the 10th grade, we're all still talking to each other, and everybody was arguing about what should curfew be. And somebody in the group said, "You know, when kids go out in the evening and they're 10th graders, I think they should come back the same day." And so midnight is our curfew. We all agreed on that, and we had the easiest 10th grade after that. All the parents, because we all had agreed on a curfew, and there was no arguing about who's got the, who's got the other thing. But I'd be happy to talk to you more about the recruitment strategies.
I'm curious whether the finding that $1 investment in the program to $2 a return, whether that's been taken up by policymakers and legislators.
Yeah, that whole body of work has really been influential in policy in the state of Washington. I'm sorry, the question was the cost benefit that I showed. Has that been taken up by legislatures? And I would say the larger answer to the question is absolutely yes. The Washington State Legislature created in the 1980s something called the Washington State Institute for Public Policy. Equal numbers of Dems and Republicans, people from key agencies and some people from universities. It's a government-funded think tank that has been commissioned first to do cost-benefit analyses, of the benefits of various preventive intervention programs like functional family therapy or the Seattle Social Development Project, et cetera. And they've done really using standard methods, these cost-benefit analyses. Our legislature has become so convinced of the benefits of these cost-benefit analyses that a couple of years ago they projected out how many prisons, adult prisons, we're going to need in the state of Washington if we kept going the way we were going. And the legislature decided that they would invest in a package of preventive and intervention components, and they took one of the prisons off the boards. And we're tracking in Washington State what's happening. And I have some statistics that blow your mind. They're really exciting to see the juvenile crime rates going down in Washington much faster than in other states in the union because we're doing these programs, both prevention and early intervention programs. I'm going to, if I could, switch to the other part of what I'd like to talk with you about this morning, taking these kinds of programs to community-wide implementation, if we could. Just going back to the point that we made earlier, we now have a lot of tested and effective preventive interventions. My partner in research, Richard Catalano, and a group of colleagues in 2012 did a special issue in The Lancet, the British journal, and they identified programs that are tested and shown to be effective, and you can see the list of programs, and you can see the kinds of outcomes that have been affected by these tested and effective preventive interventions. So there's a lot that's been tested and shown to be effective. That's a big sea change from where we were 33 years ago. And if you're interested in learning about those programs, this is the second thing I'd love to leave with you. The Blueprints for Healthy Youth Development, Sharon Mahalik is sitting there in the back. She's the mother of this. She's the person who makes this a reality. And it's at www.blueprintsprograms.com, is a website that identifies programs that have been tested and shown to be effective in well-controlled studies. Model programs have been shown to be effective in multiple studies, 2 or more high-quality studies. Promising programs are tested and shown to be effective in at least 1 high-quality study. And that website also includes, where it's available, information on the cost versus benefits of these programs from the Washington State Institute for Public Policy. The last one listed here, the Washington State Institute for Public Policy, if you go to that website and you just start tooling around, you will find their reports on the costs and benefits of a whole host of interventions, some of which have more costs and benefits, some of which produce more benefits than cost. So we're really in a different place, and yet when you go to communities, you see that often practices that either haven't been tested or that we actually know are ineffective are more likely to be used than practices and policies and programs that haven't been tested and shown to be effective. We think that introduces a really important challenge to us, those of us who want to promote the use of evidence-based programming and policies. And that is, we want to increase the use of tested effective programs and policies, but we've got to recognize that all communities aren't the same. One size is not going to fit all. This program may work in this neighborhood, but people would reject it in this neighborhood. This parenting program may be very nice for these people and they would love to come to it, but these people would say, that's not for us. And so one of the questions is, how do we help people choose the right program for their community? That led us to stop doing things to communities, as we had been doing in the Seattle project, and start to think that we should build an operating system that, just like on my computer, this operating system that I have on this computer helps me get to the right applications for my needs, that we should build an operating system that would help communities get to the right prevention applications to meet their needs. So Communities That Care is a strategy or a system that isn't a program, but it helps first the community to build a coalition of diverse stakeholders. That means all the stakeholders, all the people who care about young people's development. And I'm talking about the people who control resources and shape opinion, the mayor, police chief, school superintendent, business leaders, United Way people, etc. And I'm also talking about the people who are educators in schools of social work and run family service organizations and run health organizations and health maintenance organizations. The coalition of stakeholders needs to represent the entirety of our stakeholder community, the diversity of our stakeholder community. That coalition is then trained to assess the levels of risk and protection and youth outcomes in that community. They use something called the Communities That Care Youth Survey. It's a version of this survey is actually, I think, still administered here in the state of Colorado. It was for many years, at least, by a group called Omni for the state. And that survey has it's done in a 50-minute class period. It's done with 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. And that survey allows you to profile a community, and it shows you which risk factors are elevated in that community and which risk factors are low in that community, which protective factors are low in that community and need to be strengthened. Based on that assessment, the community then goes to the Blueprints guide and looks at what programs have been shown to be effective in addressing our priority risk factors. What programs have actually addressed our priority risk factors. You can click on a button on the Blueprints guide and it will show you a list of programs that have been shown to be addressing that set of risk factors that you've prioritized. And you can then begin to look at those programs and say which ones would work here. And the coalition needs to be there doing that work because they need to make decisions about could this work in our community or not. I was just, there's a community, am I saying it right, Montbello? Montbello is currently going through the communities of care process right now. And just yesterday I had the great pleasure of sitting in on their community planning training, in which they had collected information on a whole bunch of programs, presented the programs to the larger group of people who were there, and then they voted on it. And by the end of the day, they've identified their top 3 programs that they're now going to do really more intensive research on, and a second list of programs that they will follow up with if they don't get aren't happy with the ones that they chose initially. The system also helps people sustain high fidelity implementation of the preventive interventions they choose. Because it doesn't matter if you choose life skills training and the teachers don't teach it in the school, it's not going to make any difference to kids. So the question is not only what programs are going to be used, but how do we ensure high quality fidelity of those programs. It's been tested, as Jeff mentioned earlier, in a randomized controlled trial across 7 states. We randomly assigned, after mayor, police chief, and school superintendent agreed to their community to be randomly assigned. We then randomly assigned these communities either to be CTC community or go on with business as usual and serve as controls, where we would collect data but not do any intervention. The effects of this intervention have been tested independently by a group in Pennsylvania, Brian Bumbarger and Mark Feinberg and Mark Greenberg and their colleagues, which have also shown positive effects in a quasi-experimental study. You can see the states where we did the trial. 24 towns matched on demographic characteristics and then randomly assigned to CTC or controlled condition. We had a 5-year NIH grant to do this trial. And we started a panel of 4,400 kids when they were in 5th grade, and we've been surveying them annually every year since. We just came out of the field, surveyed over 90% of them wherever they are in the world, 1 year after graduation from high school. We're very grateful to our funders, and Colorado has been a collaborator. There are some communities here in Colorado that are part of this trial. So they got trained in communities of care over the period of a year. They went through 6 communities of care training. They got data on local levels of risk and protection. As I said earlier, they prioritized risk factors to address, and they implemented test and effective programs from the CTC menu of effective programs. I don't know if you can read those things, but the top ones are school-based programs, and it's a list of school-based programs that were chosen in different communities. The next ones are more selective prevention interventions like mentoring and tutoring for kids who are having difficulty or who are at higher risk. And the third are family programs, parenting workshops, and other family programs. And what you may notice is that in the first year of intervention in 2004 and 2005, there were only 5 school districts or school districts or communities that actually implemented school-based programs. Because the people in the superintendent schools and the teachers in those school districts and many of the school districts say, we can't do new curriculum in the schools. We've got No Child Left Behind. We've got to focus on math and reading. We can't do this other stuff. But remember, there's a coalition in these communities working with people and talking to them and thinking about what do we need for kids, and do kids really do well at school when they're stoned? And couldn't we put this kind of curriculum in place, especially since there are papers that now show that life skills training kinds of curricula actually also improve academic success? And you'll notice by the 3rd and 4th year, everybody had implemented evidence-based programs in those schools. And what that means is you're starting to get saturation. There are about 10,000 kids in the eligible range. We were really focused on working with 5th through 9th grade because we had 5 years to make a difference. So we had to really make a difference when we could see that difference within 5 years. So in the first year in the school-based programs, only 1,400 kids exposed. But by the 5th and 6th year, getting over half of the kids exposed to some form of evidence-based, test and effective preventive intervention. We were not disappointed by the number of kids in the after-school programs. We were terribly disappointed by the family-focused program numbers. We didn't succeed across these 12 communities to get the same number of families involved that we did of kids involved. We wanted 5,705 families involved as well. And so that continues to be the biggest, most difficult nut to crack in my view in terms of preventive interventions. They are effective when people participate, but getting people to participate, even if you do it as a home-based kind of intervention, is a challenge. And it's a place that we should be really working in this society. because time's our enemy here, I'm just going to say we did a lot on monitoring fidelity of implementation. We got high levels of fidelity of implementation, and this is just adherence. That is the percentage of the material taught or core components achieved. Across the bottom, you see the school programs in yellow, the after-school programs in orange, and the mentoring and tutoring programs and the parenting programs. And you'll see with one exception, we were getting very high rates of adherence, which would lead me to believe that we should get, if we're getting saturation and adherence and we're using evidence-based programs, we should get success in terms of outcomes. So let me just do this quickly. We begin in April of 2003. We start the study. After the first year is a planning year with CTC, and then after 2 years of interventions, 3 years of the whole CTC, 2 years of intervention after the planning year, when the kids are at the end of the 7th grade, we survey them and we see that there are lower levels of targeted risk factors in the CTC communities than in the control communities at the end of the 7th grade, 2 years after starting it, and lower rates of delinquency initiation, significantly lower at the community level. I'm not talking about kids who are in a program. I'm talking about community-wide rates, epidemiology, as the public health people would say. By the end of the next year, when the kids were finishing the 8th grade, we see significant reductions in kids, the portion of kids who started to use alcohol, cigarettes, smokeless tobacco, or engaged in delinquency, and reductions in the prevalence of alcohol use, binge drinking, smokeless tobacco use, and delinquent behaviors. We keep following these kids up. We stop working with these communities in the spring of 2008, and a year later we follow up the kids again. And at the end of grade 10, after we had had no contact with these communities at all for a year, you continue to see lower rates of initiation of alcohol, cigarettes, and delinquency, and significantly lower prevalence of smoking, delinquency, and violence. And just to give you an idea of the magnitude of these differences, 33% less likely to start smoking cigarettes, 32% less likely to start drinking, 25% less likely to engage in delinquent behavior than those in the control groups. These are big differences. These are big reductions in the prevalence of problem behaviors in communities. We've done a cost-benefit analysis of this. If you look at the cost, it costs about $900, almost $1,000 per child in this program. But and it's not in the program, it's in the community. So we're counting all the kids in the community when we do the cost per child. And then we're looking at the benefits. And what you'll see is that the benefits really accrue largely as a result of the reduction in delinquent behavior, a smaller benefit accruing from the reduction in smoking as a result of less early death later on. So we're projecting these benefits forward. And you can see that the smoking benefits are primarily to the smoker, the participant. They're healthier, they live longer. The benefits for delinquency are primarily to the taxpayer for not having to process kids in law enforcement and juvenile courts, and also to victims of crime. But that benefit cost ratio turns out to be a benefit cost ratio of $5.30 return for every dollar invested in communities of care. This system, once it's been institutionalized in communities, we're seeing is sustained. Blueprints has a requirement. They say we want to see if things last for at least a year after you stop doing intervention. So we stopped doing intervention for a year. We still see those coalitions, 11 of them are still in operation 20 months afterwards. 10 of those that are still going have all their tested effective programs going. Keeping the coordinator funded in these communities turned out to be a harder thing, and only 7 of those 11 had funding for a paid CTC coordinator, although some people were doing it on a voluntary basis. And they were also achieving more of the benchmarks in the CTC process, which helps people know where are they in the process and are they doing it successfully. If you're interested in CTC, it's free. It's been purchased by the Center for Substance Abuse Prevention and put in the public domain. All the materials that you need to do communities of care are at this website. It's going to be a better website in the future, but if you're interested now, go to the website and you'll say, I don't see any materials. Well, click on the phases of CTC, or the stages or phases of CTC, and then you'll see a little red thing that says materials. And when you click on the materials, all of a sudden you get these participant manuals, leaders manuals, trainers guides, PowerPoint slides, all the stuff that's used in the training. So if you're interested, you're welcome to go there. I would just let people know that we are currently working on updating the website, and also we're also working on making some of these materials available electronically so that you don't have to have a certified CTC trainer to do the training in your community. It can be led by a local facilitator, and the core content will be coming down off the web or off a DVD. People across this country are using Communities That Care system. That place where you see all those dots or whatever they are is the state of Pennsylvania, where the governor, 4 governors ago, said we're going to bring Communities of Care into Pennsylvania, Governor Tom Ridge when he was a governor. There are now over 80 communities that are actively doing Communities of Care in the state of Pennsylvania because there is a center there that continues to provide support to communities. It's run by Brian Bumbarger, who was mentioned earlier today. There are also communities in Colorado, and the first iteration in Colorado of Communities of Care was called Build a Generation, and there are a number of those communities still going. We had the opportunity in the fall to contact some communities across the country who had been doing CTC and ran into those Build a Generation communities again after a number of years of no contact. And the Steps to Success group in Montebello is, as I said, just in the process of implementing Communities of Care now. So I think we're to the place where effective prevention at scales within reach. We know risk and protective factors. We know about tested effective prevention programs. We have now systems like Communities That Care, or another system called Prosper, developed by Richard Spoth at Iowa State University, that help people implement community-wide these tested effective preventive interventions. We really have to now begin the advocacy and policy work necessary to take the knowledge that's developed over the last 30 years and get it into the main bloodstream of this society, both at the state level and at the national level. There are glimmers of it. David Old's Nurse Family Partnership is now part of the ACA, and actually the Seattle Social Development Project, the Raising Healthy Children I mentioned to you, is part of a federal pregnancy prevention initiative in which people are actually doing that program in elementary schools in Texas and Oklahoma to try to reduce teen pregnancy rates. But not enough is happening, and this is an area where I think we really, in social work, need to provide leadership. I think we've got to advocate for evidence-based prevention and say, we're not going to take it anymore. We really need to get ahead of the curve. We're not going to just wait until there are problems to be social workers. We're going to be social workers that do prevention. We need to train prevention practitioners in our schools of social work. We do a good job of training people for clinical practice to work with that family that's got a difficult child, etc. But how many people come out of our schools of social work knowing how to assess risk and read a profile of risk? How many people come out knowing how to lead a functional family therapy workshop? How many people know how to do the things we need to be able to do in order to do prevention in our communities? I think this is a real opportunity for social work training in this country. We also, as social work researchers, need to keep doing the research, keep doing the randomized trials. I was urging people that yesterday in a meeting because I think one of the most exciting things you all do here is this bridge project. It's really an exciting program. It has all the elements that should make it very successful. I would love to see a trial of the bridge program because there is no randomized trial of an after-school program in America that's been shown to be effective. This could be it, coming out of collaboration of the Bridge and this School of Social Work. So just urge it again from the public platform. And finally, we've got to also begin to really get ourselves into translational research, which is this whole question of how do we move beyond these randomized trials into thinking about all the issues of so how does it change and how much can the core content change when we're moving to a new setting? How do we ensure fidelity of implementation of new programs as we put them in place and ensure that that can be done and measured without huge costs? The whole question of how do we do this kind of scale up. So I think that I'm going to stop yelling at you and we still have 10 minutes for talk. So it's my presentation. Yes, sir. Yes, yes, absolutely. In fact, we're just doing now, in the Communities of Care trial, there's a higher rate of graduation in the CTC communities than in the control communities at the end of the 12th grade. We're now looking 1 year after to see if that is perpetuated or not. But that will turn out to be a very important finding in the cost-benefit analysis, because the academic performance, especially high school graduation, is really tied to later earnings in a big way. And so there's, to the extent that those academic outcomes are in fact affected by these kinds of interventions, it will be a big benefit to communities as well as to the kids who participate. Yeah, there's a really good paper, if you haven't seen this paper by Roger Weisberg and Joe Durlak, D-U-R-L-A-K, and Weisberg, W-E-I-S-S-B-E-R-G, Weisberg. It was published, I think it's in Pediatrics, and I think it's 2011 or 12. I'm looking at Sharon to see if she remembers. But anyway, that's a really good meta-analysis of school-based curricula for life skills training that has shown almost as big effects, actually in some instances bigger effects on academic achievement than other outcomes coming from these kinds of social and life skills, social and emotional competence promotion curricula. Other comments, questions? Yes?
I'm curious, you mentioned in the communities that care model that it was difficult for them to sustain funding for the coordinator position. Can you speak a little bit more about why that was and what you see the benefit of that position?
Yeah, the community coordinator is really a key person. It has to be a facilitator. It can't be a doer. That one community that we lost afterwards, it was because it was a small town and that person was just doing everything. And yes, there was a board, but the board was just rubber stamping what that person was doing. The coordinator is a facilitator that gets this coalition to actually do a lot of work. It's not like being on the usual United Way board. There's a lot of work that people do in communities of care boards. And so that facilitation process, making sure that we're doing that and keeping it going and going to have the surveys again, that we're going to have the data we need at the next meeting so we can do that planning and say, do we change what we're doing or do we keep going with the same programs next year given the outcomes that we're seeing, et cetera. It's a really important role. Where we've seen the greatest success is where a city starts to get to the point of understanding the importance of this for child development in the community, and they make that a city job. And in a number of towns, people have made that coordinator of the CTC process a job that's paid in the city, full-time job of the city, or sometimes shared with other responsibilities. But that really, really makes a big difference. Other communities have been successful in keeping the coordinator's position by local fundraising, working with their United Way and philanthropists in the area to keep that funding, and also going after drug-free communities grants. A number of CTC communities have been successful because they got the data, and so they're very successful in getting drug-free communities grants, and then they're successful often getting mentoring grants, helping other communities start. And so in the state of Maine, there's a lot of that going on right now. Yeah.
Have you involved Head Start and preschools at all? Any of them
In the particular trial that we did, we didn't really involve people at that developmental level because we were focused on 5th through 9th grade because we had 5 years to show effects. And so we really limited the menu of prevention interventions that we offered to those test communities in the trial. The menu actually goes of everything from nurse-family partnership to pregnant teenage single mom, all the way through the early childhood education programs like High Scope that have been tested and shown to be effective, incredible years, et cetera. So in communities that are doing communities of care without that restriction, they definitely include those people as part of the stakeholder community. And one of the challenges and questions that we decide on, and they decide on in communities, where can we get the most leverage and most immediately? Where can we get the most resources to put into it? So some communities actually start with a lot of work in the early childhood period. Other people start with a lot of work in the middle school period, sometimes during the elementary grade. So it varies across different communities that we know about. But in the trial, it was really more targeted on this middle school period. But we didn't have greater fidelity or greater range of fidelity in implementation. We were kind of implementation Nazis, I guess you would say. Let me just get back to this thing. So everybody had to be trained in the program that they were going to put in place. They had to get training from the developer. We would help arrange that if they were having difficulty, but we'd make sure they got trained from the purveyor organization in that program. We have a set of benchmarks and milestones for CTC that are you just walk through the CTC process, and each step you can check off. And that's really important for getting through the implementation stuff and getting that set up. We also have fidelity assessment checklists. Some programs, as you know, have their own checklist that's life skills training. Did I do this? Did I do this? Did I do this? No, I didn't do this part, etc. And so where there were checklists, we used those, and where there weren't, we developed them. For programs that didn't have checklists but were on the evidence-based list, we developed checklists so that the implementers would provide those checklists, and they had to turn them in. And that's one of the big things that's really a big deal and a very important deal, was getting those people, those purveyors, to turn them in. And one of the things that's very interesting, some of those communities today, this is now, what, 5 years, 6 years later, some of those communities still are collecting those forms from the people who are implementing those programs, even though right now they don't analyze the forms. But it's become an expectation. So they overview and look at them. They don't do these quantitative analyses like we did in the project, but they establish that as an expectation. You monitor what you do, and you keep track of what you do, and then we can look at it and see how it's going, and that's really an important part of it. The other thing that was important was observations. Not for matches like Big Brothers, Big Sisters. We didn't do observations of those matches. But where there was a group setting, whether it was a workshop for parents or whether it was a classroom of life skills training or whatever, All-Stars or whatever it was, the board members were taught to do the observations and to keep a checklist just like the implementers. And in addition, they also got to say, was this implemented by this presenter with enthusiasm, and also how did the people react? And so we observed 10% of the sessions, of the group sessions, board members did that. And that turned out to be a very important thing for the commitment of the board members, because when they started going to parenting classes and seeing what was actually happening that they had brought to their community, they got even more enthusiastic about what they were doing. And similarly, when they sat in on these classes doing observation. And we found very good correspondence between self-report of presenters and the observer reports of what they saw. And so that gave us some confidence. We also obviously kept track of attendance, and also, where appropriate, did pre-post surveys of participants in terms of knowledge or acquisition of skills. Yes, sir. I think you should look at the work of the Coalition for Evidence-Based Policy. Coalition for Evidence-Based Policy. A guy named John Barron, B-A-R-O-N, J-O-N, B-A-R-O-N. And and you can get on their mailing list or their email list. They continuously put out information about where they've been doing work with federal policy makers and how it's been successful, and where you're seeing evidence-based programming and policy making showing up as a result of their work. So that's one really good place to start in terms of evidence-based policy progress. Mm-hmm. Well, that's the end of time. Thanks for staying.
Thank you, Darren.